before we go, Chana?
What is this? Oh, Bi-Amp.
Bi-Amp.
Really quickly, there's a bunch of people, know-it-all types that are, leave comments and stuff like that. A few of them on this last video. This is actually an old ass video of mine from like 2-3 years ago, where I show you what, Bi-Amp versus Bi-Wire and stuff like that. And there's a lot of misconception that Bi-Amp means you need to have two separate amplifiers altogether, which is not the case. And a lot of people are always, no, that's not it. You need to do this, which if you guys remember, Joe Finn from Parasound was on, and what these people are describing is what he calls vertical biamping, meaning, yes, you have a, your left goes to two amplifiers, one for the low frequency, one for the high frequency. However, if you're using an AV receiver where you can allocate your surround backs to biamp your fronts, yeah, you don't need two separate amplifiers. Like, I don't know what it is about people on the internet thinking they know, like, hey, this is wrong. What you're saying, what you're calling biamp is actually bi-wire. And like, yeah, I don't know how they're like mixing this up. So there's just a lot of that. So what do you guys think? Do you need two separate amplifiers for it to be considered biamp for you?
No. Well, first of all, I don't biamp anything.
Neither do I. Neither do I. I don't.
So that's number one. But I mean, if you have an AVR with 9 channels, is that not like multiple channels of amplification?
Right. I mean, like, you got multiple outputs. What the heck? Yeah.
Do they want, I guess maybe some of those folks want a separate power supply for, each connection? Is that what they're saying? To me, first of all, that sounds like overkill and a waste.
Altogether,
right?
yes.
Why do you need a separate amp just to power like some tweeters? That sort of stuff makes sense to me if you're using like active crossovers, right? That makes sense. But if it's just, I don't know why you'd want to do that for passive speakers. Can somebody enlighten me? Because I'm open, right? If you're telling me like it's so much better for whatever reason,
I mean, does it mean?
Tell me why.
Let's say I have a 5-channel amp, 100 watts per channel. So I put 100 watts into the high frequency and 100 watts into the woofers. Yeah, like I totally understand the woofer thing. Yeah, right. And then if you're not using an electronic crossover, are we just relying on the speaker to resolve, like that specific driver to resolve the sound for as it naturally rolls off, right? Or do we need an electronic crossover to tell, like, hey, okay, this is high, we need to put this like 2500 and up, or this.
Yeah, the thing is, your internal crossover is going to determine that, though. Unless you bypass that.
Well, I mean, yeah, isn't that what happens though when you?
I don't think so.
No, it's still working. Okay.
Yeah, because think about it. But if you took the jumpers off the top, the high frequency and the bottom frequency, and if you fit, let's just say you put an amplifier to the top, it's still only going to send high frequencies to that tweeter. It's not going to send bass frequencies to it. Same thing on the bottom. So you're still actively going through that internal crossover. The only way to bypass that, you would have to kind of go into the speaker and connect directly to the tweeter, directly to your mid-range drivers, and directly to your woofers. So, which is a whole nother world, getting into active crossovers.
Yeah. So, I guess I just don't understand the reasoning why you need to do that. Like, what's the benefit?
I've never heard of benefit personally.
Neither have I. I've never bi-amp or bi-wire noticed the difference.
Actually, you could. To me, it seems more room for issues, right? Because what if one amplifier has slightly more gain? I mean, that's not out of the question, right?
Yeah, no, sorry.
You could possibly have 2 amps that are supposed to be exactly the same, right? But one might have a little bit more power. So now you're throwing off the balance between the woofer and the tweeter, or woofer, mid-range, whatever you have going on. Because it's not receiving the same amount of power, now maybe your tweeter's running a little hotter than they designed it. That's possible.
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that sounds like it could be it could cause some issues, is what I'm thinking. I don't know. If let's see what's if you have a tower that handles 300 watts, but your AVR only puts out 100 watts, wouldn't that drive it better?
Well, a dedicatable amplifier would, but you're going to feed it, whether you're bi-amping or not bi-amping, you're still feeding it more power. So I think either way that would work.
Yeah, so Russell, so if you have a tower that handles 300 watts and you're okay, so it only puts out 100 watts per channel. Let's just say it's real watts. Wouldn't that drive it better? Well, let's just say this. Most of the time when you have issues, it's because bass requires a lot of power, right? Almost, I doubt that those tweeters are receiving more than, what, 20 watts? I don't know, like very small amount of wattage probably going to the tweeter, right? So I doubt that you can get that loud enough without like popping your eardrums, right? So, I guess an argument can be made that when you're sapping the amplifier of power because it's too much bass, then it might not have enough for the tweeter. But in that case, it's probably that AVR is probably doesn't have enough power in general, right? Probably that power supply can't provide enough power to all the channels.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it matters whether you split them off like that, right? So anyway.
Here's Paul. Here's Paul. Many believe that there is more dynamic range to be had from multiple amplification channels per speaker, but you only get so much power from a single power supply.
He said it better than I did. That's it. It's the power supply, I think, a lot of times, right? When we use these power amps, right? Like this Parasound that we are always bragging about, the thing has a huge power supply.
Yeah.
That you couldn't fit into an AVR.
Yeah. So to answer Chris's question, he says, your amps, basically does your amp see different impedance depending on the frequency? And yes. So typically, and I'm not super technical, but typically I've been told the lower frequencies can kind of show a different impedance. So for example, I've had Klipsch RF7s for a long time. The original 7s, I was told they would dip down about 2.8 ohms when you hit really low frequencies. And so that's pulling and requiring more power from your amplifier. So tweeters, I don't think they would really change maybe as much. And Aaron can probably address that better than I can. But yes, depending on the frequency, I didn't realize that either. That's why they call it nominal impedance. So even though your speakers might be 8 ohm nominal, they may dip down to 4 ohms or in some cases 2 ohms.
Aaron, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I made a comment earlier that when you bi-amp, you could have an issue where maybe the gain isn't the same on both versus like when you have one source coming in, then
Yeah, it's all the
you
same.
can be sure that it's going to be the same and the crossover is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Versus you could have the tweeter slightly higher. Is that something we should think about?
I don't know if it's a real big issue. But yeah, maybe if the amplifier is not designed correctly, or like if you use an external amplification and you don't have your gain set the exact same way, then yeah, you could run into that. I mean, personally, I've never bi-amplified a speaker. And I just don't understand why people want to. And you guys were talking about AVRs. I mean, I've seen so many AVRs that will specifically say like, here's these extra channels and they are for bi-amplifying speakers. So AVRs are, some of them at least are marketed to have bi-amplification.
Trying to encourage it, yeah.
Potential. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Now, here's something interesting in car audio. In car audio, do you typically use let's say you have your mid-range and then you have your tweeter. Are you running those off of separate channels or are you using the crossover,
It's all active. Well, I mean, for the side of car audio that I'm in, it's all active.
I see.
You've got a DSP that controls all your crossover networks and stuff like that. So everything has its own amplification channel.
So it does make sense, like if you're using active crossovers.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you need a separate channel for amplification for each drive unit. Each one's going to have its own channel. Then you would set gains either in the DSP or on the amplifier itself, and then all the equalization and the crossovers is taken per channel via DSP.
And you're checking it with a mic afterwards, right? Making
Yeah,
sure that
yeah.
it's responding the way you want it to respond, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
And
other people are actually doing that when they're bi-amping, right? So it
yes, Tim
could be
has a good
better.
point.
I don't know.
Studio monitors are almost always biamp, and
Biamp,
that's
yeah.
true. I mean, they have their own, but that's because they have
They have different levels of
They're-
wattage going into each driver as
right.
well.
And to me,
It's not
those
like
are
the same.
all they're all active.
Yes.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, they all have an active network or something like that. Well, they're not all of them, but the majority, if they're bi-amplified, they're going to have most likely their own active network for their own crossovers. They're not. It's not just an amplifier running into a passive crossover, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. And then there's also dip switches on the back of like studio monitors to enhance the bass or cut a little bit here, or cut a little bit there, depending on your
Right.
room. So you can dial it into your room.
Right.
You know what I think is cool? I think an ELAC speaker did this a while back, active speaker, where they had, let's say, I think it was maybe a class D for the bass, right?
Yeah.
And then
Interesting.
a different like a class AB for the mid range, and then like a class A just for that tweeter because it didn't need a lot of. I'm like, that's a cool way to do it, right? You kind of get the best of all of them.
Probably
Yeah, I think that
expensive way
gets
to
a
do
lot
it.
of. I think that gets a lot of people to say, "Oh, well, you know," because there's a lot of people that don't like Class D for whatever reason. So as long as you can slap Class AB or Class A in there too, then those people are more likely to buy it. Then
Gotcha.
Yeah.
to me, that's just kind of marketing, I guess.
I don't know that you could hear a difference, but if there was a difference, that would probably be the best way to do it because you don't need a ton of power for that tweeter. So if you were adamant about running Class A, that's probably the place to put it.
Yeah.
You don't want any Class A subs, right?
Well,
No.
yeah, and then you got heat issues, and then a bigger amplifier, heavier amplifier, it doesn't have a good efficiency for, the more power that's trying to draw. So yeah, if you're going to split it up, usually it makes the most sense to put the Class D on the lower frequencies where you're going to most likely consume the more power.